There we go. Okay. Well, we've heard about several theoretical estimates and infrasound. I want to tell you today about something that is a ground truth. This was a real event that occurred relatively recently in Chile. Let me first give you a general background, then I'll go into some details and then discuss, well, geez, maybe this provides us some constraints on some of the models. We're talking about thick, folded and twisted glass. These are vesicular glasses that are, make sure I get this right, because I don't want to turn this thing off. Well, that's the wrong, I knew I'd do this. Okay. No, I can't find okay, anyway, we'll start again. So here we are. This is the dark vesicular green glass at the top, and they entrain a variety of flower seeds, some of them including paleograsses, and I'll give you some examples of that. These are scattered across several areas across the Atacama Desert, and those arrows indicate just some typical masses, anywhere from 10 centimeters up to about 30 centimeters across. These are very widespread in localized areas. They were first interpreted as the effect of fireballs. These are from geologists on the ground in Chile. And then later, they just concluded that these were due to grass fires. So we went back and checked to see if this interpretation was correct, because we saw some inconsistencies based on some examples of the glasses we had seen back in 2007. Back in 2015. So we're going to suggest that, in fact, these are generated by a super bolide that happened very recently. Let me give the geologic context. This is, the upper left is a picture of the area of Chile. The altiplano is up in the upper right. This is a topographic representation, 3D model in conjunction with some remote sensing data. We're dealing with the lower elevation of the Atacama Desert. This is a late Pleistocene paleo wetlands fed by underground water. There's also older Pliocene alluvium and colluvium that is extended down from a high elevation. And this, where we found the material is in certain areas along this 70-kilometer corridor. These are in certain locations. And to put this into perspective, because it's hard to see this, just so we're dealing with between Baltimore and Washington. The distribution of these occur in clusters. They're not uniform everywhere, but where they do occur, they occur over broad regions. They're typically on silty mounds, but not always. We find some of them associated with these alluvial and pebbles, and they occur in contrasting lithologies. That's really an important point in terms of trying to understand what happened. This is an aerial view with a drone extending over, and what you see is right in the center, that's me walking for scale. As you can see, this is a really desolate area. We didn't see anything living at all except for us. And if you notice these little mounds, and you'll see these scattered little black spots on them, that's where this occurs. It's been cut by some later Holocene channels from stuff coming down from in the upper altiplano. These things are vesicular. They're green and black slabs. And some of these black slabs are really large. They indicate rapid quenching. Let me give you a close-up view where you can see everything just simply stop right there. And when I say large, this just gives you one example. And if you look at the upper top, you'll see those black spots all across that upland area. That's all impact glass. That's all part of the glass. But you notice this thing is about 1 meter across. They're folded and rolled. And let me just give you this example. This is an example where it's been folded and you trap some material in between. And the lower right is where it's been rolled. And that's about a 2-foot long piece that's been extending outward. We find distal clusters. And in fact, there's the glass strewn fields way up on the top, but we find them spread out over large distances as well. We also find trapped paleograss. This is grass that was actually trapped to the bottom of the glass. And this gets into the reason why they thought that maybe these things could have been the result of paleo fires. And the two sides, there's a quenched glassy surface, but then they're mixed with the under surface. And there's a temperature gradient within each one of these pieces of glass that we see. And they're stretched. Now, let me give you some examples. Here's one that's been stretched that indicates that it was momentum after being heated and fused. And you can see this in addition when you look at some of the details. For example, That shows you some of the flow lines that were occurring. This is consistent with all this material where they end up rolling over each other while they were still hot. If we look at the other side, so this is that one side, this is the same piece on the other side, you can see where the underlying material will actually trap in some of the gravels and the silt and the paleograss. That's the first contact surface, and that's the smooth quenched glass surface. Some of these are really quite large. This one is about 2 feet across. And if you look inside this glass, you can see that it's really a high-grade green glass. Compositions vary widely, and all of this depends on the composition, indicating these are highly localized sources, that whatever was heated right there and then entrained. We find evidence, in contrast to the paper that suggested they were due to paleo fires, we find clear examples of ultra-high temperature decomposition. We find complete transformation of zircon to bedelite. In the left, you see just a bedelite rim. In the middle, you see this was completely turned into bedelite. And that temperature requires temperatures above 1700 degrees centigrade. And unlike the 9 impact glass layers in Argentina that are less than 10 million years, over an area, by the way, about half the size of Texas, there's no shock material. So this was not a surface impact. This was a high temperature transient event. But wait, there's more. Turns out what we found in here are abundant clasts of a lot of different types of material. There's nickel iron sulfides and phosphides, including things like buckwaldite. There's in addition the chlorine-rich albite. For anybody who knows meteorites will begin to understand what this is indicating. We find enstatite, and we find perovskite, as well as intergrown with glycolite and troilite, all trapped within this material with corundum inclusions. We also find phosphorite diopside with native iron, metal, and iron sulfide inclusions, and serpentine. And some of the serpentine indicates the aqueous alteration. And there we can see what appears to be type 1 calcium aluminum-rich inclusions, that is CAIs, with cores containing secondary alterations, including monticelite and wollastonite. So what does this all mean? In human terms, it means this was an extraterrestrial source. This means that this was a high temperature oxide under reducing conditions. And this means that this is probably primordial material along with aqueous alteration. And each one of these indicate different parent body affinities. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that this is an evolved component with both metal component as well as refractory component. And it's kind of indicating that this is a primitive component, indicating that we have a mixture of a lot of things. So what could this be? Well, one option, it was a volatile-rich carbonaceous rubble pile. The other possibility would be simply that it was a comet. And if you look at the results that Don Brownlee describes for stardust, that basically is its composition. And of course, we don't know what the relationship is between those two. So when did this occur? Well, there have been dates, and this was a good part of the paper that these guys did, along with other folks who've done this before, primarily looking for the archaeology of the region. Nunez, one of the localities, has a data from 11.5 to about 13,000 years. This is based on carbon-14 dating. They have Chimpana, which is in the center one, they seem to be indicating an older age. And this is one of the reasons why they thought that maybe this was due, because of these different ages, they thought this was due to the grass fires that occurred over a period of time. The trouble is that these different ages are due to different sampling strategies. For example, when going back to where they sampled the material and descriptions of it, it turns out that the entrained grasses were diagenetically altered, and they were older. In addition, some of these underlying sediments that they found did not constrain the age, it only constrained the maximum, not the glass age. So we kind of not include those. So what about the younger age of Nunez? Well, we found that they also sampled some younger ages, and that's represented in the upper right. And in fact, some of those things, but we know that all these examples, based on the meteoritic components that are inside them, are all the same. They have to be the same. I can't believe that this happened to be a location where things kept on hitting. So when we remove the part that says carbonized roots, that we're cutting layers with carbonaceous plants, we end up with an age that looks much more like this, with an effective age between 12.5 and 13,000 years ago. So what happened? Multiple air bursts, maybe 1 to 5 kilometers above the surface. And in this context, Chelyabinsk was simply a sneeze. This is nothing compared to what we're seeing here. Several locations along north-south trajectory. Maybe these are all high angles where they're coming down and colliding with the surface, or different temperatures with different sizes or altitudes. Perhaps it was a broken object like Schwarzman walking tree, which simply broke up before it got into the Earth's atmosphere. Or maybe it was a weak asteroid. These are all options. But we know that we had very, very intense radiant flux. This is an example of some calculations by Svetsov in 2006. But Svetsov made a comment and said, there's a problem. And Mark Boswell made this comment as well with Dave Crawford, that if you have a high optical depth, a very low optical depth, it can't get into the glass. You need something that's pretty clear to do this. But we do see this high temperature beneath, and we see temperature gradients within the samples. Well, maybe high winds. This is clear from this, and this is from actually being on the surface. We see evidence for blowout zones within the region. So this is not just from the air burst, it's also from the radiant heat. And this is probably the winds from the treading wake, which freshly exposed the surface, and that actually helped cause the additional heating of the soils. And finally, there are meteoric finds, and where does that come in? And I think there's an analogy here with what some of this we see for the blast winds on Venus. You wouldn't believe that you could have a small object getting through the surface, all the way to the surface of Venus, yet we do see it. And many of the dark, which is radar dark, is piled up against ridges or trapped within crevasses. And one of the suggestions that was made during the Magellan project, that in fact this stuff was coming down behind the wake and actually rubbed across the surface, not just the blast, but actually something that was distributed across the surface. So this gives us right to the Boswell and Crawford. That may be the best example. What are the implications? One, this was a super Tunguska fireball over Chile about 12.5 to 13,000 years ago. And this was generated widespread gases accompanied by strong winds. The object was, I think, probably, both Scott and I are thinking, is probably a rubble pile with trapped grains, indicative of a primitive body consistent with either a voltage-rich carbonaceous chondrite or a comet. Humans occupied this region, actually. They were there from around 12 to 14,000 years. Most of them were up higher in the elevations, which is kind of curious, but there's a lake up there. This is a case study for benchmarking models and to understand the potential effects and consequences. This means a burst altitude, melting, or one or multiple bodies. And we still need more field studies to constrain the full aerial extent, the range and trends and compositions of the meteorites, surface interactions, the temperatures recorded in different locations, and then the precise age for each one of these areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.